So for those of you who weren't here last week, I'm William. After Effects is something I love. And last week I made it a little bit interesting for you for the first one, doing a little bit of animation. Today is going to be just more technical stuff, not fun stuff. So just open up After Effects if you haven't already. And I'm going to start off with more details about comps and why you would use them, compositions if you didn't get that last time, and just the basics of arranging things in After Effects. I'm going to just start off by creating a new composition. I'm just going to default it to something standard. Okay, so what we did last time is we had just like a comp with a new solid in it of whatever type. So let's just, I'm just going to make one just a random size so you can just see the difference. So by default that creates this solid that goes for the entire duration of the comp. But what if you wanted to have layers that pop in and out or appear at different times? So what you can do is you could, one way is you can animate the opacity. So you can select your layer and press T to get the opacity, and you can animate stuff like the opacity coming in and showing at different points or something like that. So this is the sort of, animated way of doing it. But for certain reasons, maybe you want to like crop out a sound, or you want to, many different things. You can also just tell After Effects that you want a layer to only exist from a certain point in time to another point in time. So every layer in After Effects will have an in point and an out point. So that means that that's where the layer starts and that's where the layer ends. So by default, when you create a shape layer, it'll just be the length of the comp. But if you import something else, it might actually only be a specific length of time and only fit into a... You have an in point and an out point for every layer. So basically that means if I just move the mouse to the beginning of this layer, you see it changes to a little horizontal arrow. So that's how you can just by hand drag out this area. So that's adjusting the start point of this layer. So you see if I drag it now past the current time indicator, this layer no longer exists in this point. And then when I move in the timeline to where this red bit is showing, that layer exists. And you can do the same with the end. So you can just have a layer exist for a certain period of time. So if you're doing something and your layer is not visible for some reason, check that its in and out points actually show for the point that it's not visible. So that's like a thing that people often run into, like they're animating and then suddenly their layers have disappeared. Just check these points in your animation. But you can also use that to hide things at different times. Okay, and to make your life easier, there are keyboard shortcuts for this. So just make sure that the layer you want is selected. And then if you press Alt or Option if you're on Mac, and the square bracket keys. So the right square bracket key will crop the out point of the layer, and the left square bracket will crop the in point. So you can just go to any point in time and say, okay, layer stops and starts here and there. So that's Alt and left or right square brackets. Oh yeah, I did promise you some keyboard shortcuts last week. I did find a very nice one from a very nice website. It's called School of Motion, and I've liked them for a long time. They do good After Effects tutorials. They do have paid things as well, but they have some free tutorial. I'm just going to, so this is called 30 Essential Keyboard Shortcuts. I've told you a few of them, but there's some nice ones for other things that will make your life easier, and little snippets about what things do in there. So that's quite useful if you want to read that a little bit later. That in and out point thing will work on all layers, and you can also do it with multiple layers. So if let's just have a red solid here as well. So if I select and shift click another layer, and I do the Alt left bracket, and that'll start both layers at the same time, and I go somewhere else, Alt right bracket, end it, both of them at the same point. And yeah, this is a good point to just remind you that just like Photoshop, Illustrator, the layer order dictates by default which one is on top. So the red is on top, so it views on top. It sounds obvious, but later on when we get into more complicated stuff, this will actually not be true. But for now, while we're working in 2D stuff, that's how it works. Okay, that should make sense so far. So until now, we've just been working with one comp to do something. But I did mention that you can have multiple comps in a project. Why you would have that is basically to simplify things. So you can have one for one scene and then one for a completely different scene. So it's not all, taking up hundreds of layers in one massive complicated thing. So let's go, and I'm going to add a new composition, and let's call this, let's leave it as comp2. Yeah, I'm not going to rename it, whatever. Let's just give it a different background color so you can see that this is a different one. So this is going to have a horrible bright cyan background. And so that's comp2. And then if I switch back over here, I have other comps open at the moment, but don't worry about them. When you have multiple comps and you have opened them, you'll have tabs that you can switch through over here. And so that way you can just switch between editing things. So what you could do then is you can have one comp where you have one scene, and then you have multiple comps where you edit each scene, and then you just join them all together in one main comp where all your stuff gets edited together. So if I go into comp2 here, and we've got this project panel on the left-hand side here, which I discussed last time. This is where all the different things in your project are listed. So there you can see comp1 and comp2. I can go and I can drag comp1 into my layer list over here in comp2. So what will happen then is when I go through the timeline, you can see the layers from comp1 appear in the sequence that they, are visible over here in comp2. Hopefully that's making sense. You will see though that it's showing the blue background instead of the white background from comp 1. So that's because there's transparency in there. The background in a comp is not actually a solid color, it's just transparency. So you can see that when I press this button over here, the little grid icon over here, toggle transparency grid. So if I turn that on, you get that sort of background you see in Photoshop where transparent areas are. So you can see this is transparent. So if I switch into comp 2 and do the same, turn that on, it's just transparent areas. The color is just there for color. You will see that color in a video, but when you're mixing up comps and stuff, it's not actually there. It's just invisible. So this is getting a little bit more complicated. Do you want me to go over that again? So if I'm just going to delete this, just pressing delete. So I can go into the project list and I can grab anything in there and I can drag it into the timeline panel over here with the layers, and we'll add that layer into here. You can also, if I just delete that, you can drag it in to your composition view. But the problem with this, you might actually want this. In this case, I don't want it. It will go exactly where the mouse is. So in this case, it won't be centered on the video, but maybe if you've got a character or something and you just want to place it into a specific spot, you can do that. But if you have like a video and you just want it to be in the center, just dropping it in the layer list will fit it to the thing if it is the same size as your comp, as this one is. This brings a comp in a comp, so these sort of nested comps, as a separate layer. And you can then drag this layer to different points in time. So what was happening at 1 second-ish in comp 1 will now be happening 4 seconds later, or wherever you drag it to. So every layer can be dragged in time to appear at different times. So this is basically like a video that you're now dragging around in here. I'm not explaining that very well, but hopefully that makes sense. So at the start of the comp is now just moving later on. Layers that have time to them, so like a video, you can't drag the start point earlier than the start of that layer because there's nothing there. An image, you can do that because it's just going to extend it over the entire video. But you can then crop this begin point for these things so it only appears at a certain time. And then you'll see that you get a little bit of an indicator over here saying that there is, 1 second of stuff over here before you've done the start point or the end point or something like that. I'm going to basically explain that all over again, but just with a little bit more visuals this time. So I'm just going to close these. So what I have in this project are 4 comps other than the ones I showed you just now. So I've got a start comp. This is just more visual so you can sort of see what's happening. So I've got a little bit of text over here with a little animation on it saying start. I've got another comp with middle, a little bit of text over here sliding in saying middle, and another one with end. So each of them have a little background over here in different colors. And then what I've done is I have created a main comp. So you see that over here, where I've laid them all out from start, middle to end. So I've laid out them over time, just dragging them into different times. And you can see this is basically how you would edit a sequence of different comps together. I mean, this is a super simple thing. You could do it in one comp, but imagine it's like character walking, character conversation, city shot, or something like that. So this way you can just join them all into one comp, have little transitions or something between them and things like that. So if I just say composition, new main comp, let's give this a magenta background just so you can see it's a different one. So what I can do is I can say find my start, find my middle, and find my end. I'm just control clicking on the individual ones, just giving you a new technique in case you don't know this. So I've got start, middle, and end selected, and I'm just going to click and drag them into my new main comp layer list over here. So you'll see, because I created this previously with a slightly different comp size, actually, I think this is 720p, so it just doesn't fit in there quite right, but you see it's centered in this comp. You'll see I've got a little vignette, which is just a little blurred edges thing over here. And you're only seeing that vignette because all that is a solid layer here on a background from the composition of a different color. So just be aware of when you're doing things like this, if you're using the comp background color and you're dragging your comp into another thing, the background color does not come through. You would have to add a solid in the background if you wanted that to have a specific color. So by default, they all start at the start at 0 seconds. So you'll see that when I go over time, I've got start, middle, and end all showing up at the same time over here. So that's not what we wanted for this. So what I'm going to do is each of these are, I believe, 10 seconds long. So if I want to space them out over time, I would have to have a 30-second comp. So I'm just going to show you this again to edit the comp settings. I'm going to go composition settings, and I'm going to make this 30 seconds so I can line them all up after each other. And while I'm at it, let's just change this to the same size, just so it fits in there. I think I had these with non-square pixels or something. Ignore what I'm doing now, but I'm just saying fit to comp just so it looks right. So you can do a whole lot of things in different settings over here. I just said fit it to comp so it just looks all right. So you'll see that since I started with a 10-second comp and I have a 30-second thing now, I now have a scroll bar. So the length of the comp is longer than this. I don't think I showed you this last week. So you can actually zoom in and out in time. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. Well, more than that, but there's a little dragger at the bottom here with a little small mountain and a big mountain icon. It's basically just zooming in and zooming out in time. So you can just show a specific area or see the whole thing. So I'm just going to zoom all the way out so I can see the entire comp. And then I'm going to drag and arrange these things. So I've got my start. I'm going to move the middle to the end of this. and my end to the end of the middle there. So that's the quick way to do it. There's actually a way to just make that even simpler. If you're holding a layer and dragging it, if you hold down the Shift key, it might be a little bit hard to see, but you'll see that when I move it, it now snaps 2 bits. So it will snap to the current time indicator, and it will snap to the ends or starts of other layers. So this way you can just quickly make sure things snap into place without having to manually line things up. You just hold in Shift and it will snap to different points. Hopefully that makes sense. So now I've just laid them out in time. So I've got start, middle, and end all after each other. And if you want to go and edit, so say I want the start to be slower or something, I can just select my start comp, double click on it, and then I can go edit the timing of these keyframes or something so it goes slower. So if I now go to my new main comp, the start text goes way slower than it was before. So everything you do in these individual comps will show up when they mix together into another comp. I hope that's making sense. You may have seen in this one that I've been showing you, I've got these funny little things showing up on the layers, little blocks and arrows and stuff. So these are called markers, and they're really useful for just letting you know things. Like say you've got a music track that you want to animate to, and it's got a beat or sound effects or something like that at certain points in time. So what you can do is, let's just go to this, just so it's easy for you to see. So say this layer, it's not, but let's say it's a sound effect or it's an audio track or a video that you want to mark a specific point on. Let's say at 2 seconds into this green solid layer, there's something noteworthy. You can add a marker to it just to quickly let yourself know that this is happening at this specific time. So there's a keyboard shortcut with the asterisk key on your numpad. If you don't have a numpad on a laptop keyboard, there you can do it in other ways, but it's this key, the asterisk key. You should be seeing that. So that adds this marker at the current time with this layer selected. So you see we've got this little diamond over there. So that's just showing that there's a marker there. This is indicating something. So it's really useful for just letting yourself know things, but it also works with what I showed you just now with that snapping thing. So let's say you've got a marker here and you want your text to start at that time. So if I drag this red solid and hold down Shift, let's just move the current time indicator because it snaps to that as well. You'll see that it can snap to that point over there. So that way you can just know that things are happening at a certain time and easily lay out your things to happen. You can also, with these markers, if I just double click on it, you can actually add comments to it. So you can say text starts here or something like that. And you can also have a duration. You can say, I want this text to be 2 seconds long. So now you'll see that this marker has now split open, and you've got a marker that lasts for 2 seconds saying text starts here. And then that's just a nice way for laying out and letting yourself know that things are happening over here. A more advanced use for this is, say you're doing a DVD or something, who knows, and you want to add like chapter titles. This can also be used for that. But for that, you would have to use composition markers. So what I've done so far is adding layer markers, because I pressed that key while a layer was selected. So that adds the marker to the layer. You can also do that by, you see at the right-hand side, there's a little, right on the end of the screen here, there's a little marker icon, the comp marker bin. So if you click and drag that, you'll see it adds a composition marker, not a layer marker, a composition marker. So that's a different thing here. That's not the same as the layer marker. This is a composition marker. So this is not attached to any specific layer, but it's attached to the comp. So you can just have this indicating something about this entire composition. So this is useful for saying something like, I'm just saying solid start here or whatever, because in this case, this is where they're starting. So if I'm going to create a new composition, just test comp. I'm going a little bit fast through this, but we've got a lot to do today. So hopefully this makes sense. So this was in comp 1. And now if I drag comp 1 into my test comp, you'll see that that shows up that composition marker that I added as a layer marker on that comp. So that's a nice way for you to transfer these things so you can easily lay out things like this. So you can see now solid start here. The only annoying thing is that it doesn't update. So if I go into comp 1 and I move this marker now, it stays in the place that it was when I dragged it in. So it's a little bit annoying in that respect. If you want to replace that, you have to say, select your marker. Oh, power came back on. Nice. So markers, update markers from source, and then you'll see that marker updates from the original comp. So this is not the most important thing that you will have in After Effects, but it's really useful for organizing things. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. If you don't have the asterisk key on your keyboard, or you have to do weird shortcuts for that, you can also just go into your layer markers, add marker. So that will add a marker on the specific layer at that time. Or you can say in the layer menu at the top here, markers, add marker. So that layer menu is the same as right-clicking on it. You get all the same options there. So I'm just going to create a new comp, a new project, just so it's start from scratch so there's nothing to confuse you. You should have a folder with your things that I told you to download unzipped into. You should have these files: cartoon bounce sound effect, dog large, dog small, penguin 1 AI, penguin 1 layered AI, 2 Photoshop files, and then a folder with image sequence, which should have, I think it's 80 images in it with long titles on them. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is how to actually import things into After Effects. So it's all nice and all to just work with solids and text layers and stuff, but if you want to bring in video or audio or images and things, this is how you'll do it. So the simplest way is, if you've got your folder with your images or whatever. Let's say dog large. If you click on it and drag it, if you've got your After Effects in the background, you can just drag it into After Effects, and then you'll see it should pop up into your project list over here. So you can also do that with multiple files. So if I go, let's see, dog small, dog large, and cartoon bound sound effects. So I've got 3 things selected. I can just click and drag multiple things into the project. And you'll see it now. I've got 2 dog larges because it just double imports it. So just be aware of that. So now I've got all these things sitting in the project. If you don't want something in there for some reason, you can select them. You can also delete them. And this will just delete them from the project. It won't delete the files off your computer. So that's the simplest way to add things. Another thing you can do if you don't want to leave After Effects, in the project list over here, if you just double click in that empty space, it'll pop open a dialog to select and import things. So there I can say dog large, dog small, select them and import them, and it will do the same thing. It does give you the option to actually create a comp from things in that. So in this case, there was a selection that I had which said create comps. So this now gives you a dialog to say create composition from that individual there, and it will now create a funny thing here. So this is my dog. So that's because when I double clicked this, there was an import option here selected saying create composition. So if you don't have that selected and you do this, it will just import the things into the list here. Depends what you want to do. If creating a comp from a thing is useful for if you just want to use it as is, but if you want to use these things like in a comp that you already have, you just deselect that create composition thing here. So hopefully that makes sense. That's just simple selecting things. So this would be images, videos, audio, After Effects files. I mean, yeah, you can do After Effects files, Photoshop files, Illustrator files. Basically all the different things that you can open in basically any Adobe program, and then plus a few special things for 3D things and stuff, but we're not going to get into that now. So you can basically just open them all up in After Effects, pop them up, and then once they're in there, you can drag them into compositions and do stuff. Okay, but the confusing thing comes in if you're doing this and say your files are on a workstation at the university or someone else's computer or something like that, you may run into an instance of these files aren't there anymore. So let me see if I can replicate this. Yeah, so I have a, I can't do this. I'm going to quickly select these things. I'm just going to move them into a different folder. So let's just pretend I'm moving to another computer or something funny like that. Then you might, when you open up your project when you get home or something, you might get a thing saying, files can't be found, oh damn. And then you should, if after all, it's still got it in memory, but you might get a thing of everything looks like this now. It's all error messages and, oh shit, what do I do now? So the first step would be to not allow this to happen in the first place. When you starting your project, create a folder for your specific project and put all your files that you're going to be using in that folder. And then you can take that folder and your saved project around and it will always work. This is because, say, like you're working on a 4K video project and you've got like 500 gigabytes of video or something. You don't want to have that duplicated in your project. So it links to the different files on your computer. Okay, so the two things that I'll show you is the one is to just fix this problem. So you can see in the list that all these things are broken. They're showing this error screen over here. What you can do is either right click on one of them and you can say replace footage. So this is dog small. So I'm going to right click on that, replace footage file. So then I just need to go find that image now and say import. And you'll see now, since they were all in the same folder, it has found all the other ones as well. So it's saying 4 additional missing items have been found. So if they're all in the same folder, your thing will be fixed instantly. If you've got them split all over your computer and you need to go find them, that might get a little bit more annoying and you have to go and find all the individual ones. But you see it now, that fixes the problem. So if you then say you've started your project and then you just realize when you're saving and you're getting up and you want to go to another computer, oh damn, I didn't put them in one folder. What do I do now? Like, they're not in the same folder. I'm going to have to copy them and all sorts of stuff. There is a simple function in After Effects. So if you go to the File menu, Dependencies, you'll see that there's a whole lot of options over here. The first one is saying Collect Files. So what this will do, if I click on it, it says this project needs to be saved. I haven't saved this project because I'm just testing it. So I'll say Save. Let's choose a folder. So this is, I'm just going to put it on my desktop, new folder, Training 2. And let's just call it Training. So I've got Training 2 folder with Training 2 project, save. And now we'll get a little window of saying Collect Files. So this is basically saying, you can say collect all source files and it'll copy every single thing that you've used into that folder that you've selected to save your project. And it will save a new copy of your project. See, it will give an option over here for a new folder, save. And now it creates a project with a folder with all the footage that you've used in there. So this is a nice way to just move from one place to another. If you say you want to send your project to somebody else, you can do this, consolidate it all into one folder, and then you can just send this to somebody. So it just puts it all nicely into one folder. The only problem then is, like as I said just now, say you were working on a 4K video project where the videos are like 10 gigabytes or something. It is going to duplicate them and you're going to have copies of your video taking up space. But now you can just copy this folder, move it to a flash disk, move it to a hard drive, and you won't get that linking issue anymore. Okay. All right, so the reason why I have got a dog large and dog small is to explain things about preparing footage for your project. So if I look at, I'm just going to select dog small. In the project panel over here, you can see it's 532 by 800 pixels. If I select dog large, you see it's 2000 by 3008 pixels. So you should know that like small images don't have enough data in them. So if I scale them up, you're going to get pixelated effects. So if I go into this file over here and I'm going to go to 100% zoom. So yeah, we can see hairs and stuff on my dog. Detail is all there, and that's fine. Dog small, if I just bring that to the top over here, he still looks fine at 100% zoom. But let's say you were animating like him as a character or something, move him across the screen, and say you want him to come closer to the camera, and you do stuff like scaling him up. Now, if I zoom in to 100% again, the difference is quite obvious that it's pixelated. So if I hide dog small and show dog large, well, let's just get it to sort of the same scale-ish. You can see the difference in, you can see hairs, and you just get a pixelated mess over here. So it should be obvious, but my advice to you then is, if you're creating characters or you're taking photos or you're doing something with raster images, so images with pixels, they need to be at least the size of the largest you can imagine them being in your project. So like in this case, if you want to scale up something to bring them closer to the camera or something, you want them to be at least the biggest you can imagine that. And I would say even bigger than that, so you can have more detail, just in case you want to zoom in even more for some reason that you don't expect currently. So if you're creating a Photoshop file for your project, and your project is going to be 1080p or something like that, create your Photoshop file twice the size. So what's that? 2160 by 280 or whatever. So something like that. So just go into like Photoshop. If your project is 1920 by 1080, so your video is this size and you want your character to be animated in there or whatever, just make your thing times it by 2. So just say times 2, and that will easily just give you, before you create it, you want your comp to be the size. Don't just resize it, because you can have the same issue. So have your comp be this big, you'll have more size, your files will be larger or whatever, but when you're animating, you can just be sure that you'll have detail in your characters. Because there's nothing worse than animating your character and it's looking great, and then suddenly, like in certain scenes, they look all pixelated and ugly and horrible. It just ruins things. So this is something you would have to do right from the start when you're creating your art or something for your project, so you can avoid having pixelated things. Hopefully that makes sense. But of course, there's the other option. As you know, Illustrator has the option for vector images. Well, it is vector images, and those can be scaled infinitely. So if you want to create characters, that might be a nice option for creating things, because then you can scale them up and they will always have detail. So depending on the style of characters or art or whatever that you want to use to animate, Illustrator might be an option. Or if you want to go for painter sort of looking stuff, just do what I said and make them big from the start, because there's no way to recover that 2 weeks into your project when you've discovered that everything is too small and you need to scale them up. You would have to repaint them and do all sorts of things like that, and it will just be a nightmare. So let's avoid that from the start. Okay, so you will have noticed I have told you that there is the image sequence folder over here. So this is another type of thing. So basically this is just 80 images that form a video, but they're all in images. So you might get this from something like a 3D animation program or something where you've exported an animation, but it's not as a video, it's a sequence of images. Or you've been taking photos for a stop motion animation project or something like that. So you've got a whole sequence of photos. After Effects can import these as basically a video. So you'll see when I click on one of these, it actually comes up with an option. Hopefully you can see this, saying PNG sequence. So these are PNGs. So this is a PNG sequence. It recognizes this because it's got this numbering scheme of 0001, 0002, 00 blah, 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 all the way up to 80. So if you want After Effects to identify these as a sequence, they just need to have this numbering of 0 to whatever at the end. So if I do this, I'm going to say, make sure it's PNG sequence. And in this case, I'm actually going to say, create composition. And I'm going to say import. And then you'll see that we have this basically working as a video. So if I press play, I just created a quick little sequence saying After Effects training and my little online handles or whatever. This basically now acts like a video, and you can work with it as one thing instead of having to create, lining them up as 80 images. So that makes life a lot easier. This is exactly what it would look like to have things imported as a video. It's just one thing playing back like this. So hopefully that makes sense. You just can open it up, make sure that you've got sequence selected, and it will import it as a sequence of things. However, if say you've been taking photos with your camera for a stop motion project and they don't have this correct sequence, they've got numbers in funny orders or something like this, DCIM 814, 862, 8 whatever, because you've had to take multiple photos or something. So in this case, it wouldn't identify it as a sequence, but you can still sequence them. So this has actually been improved in recent versions of After Effects. So if I select all of these, so say this is a folder of images that don't line up. If you have the Create Composition Import options over here, and you say Import, it will import all 80 images into this list over here. But then you'll get this option with new composition from selection selected. And you can say, I want all these still frames to last 1 frame, and I want to sequence layers. So you've got to make sure sequence layers is turned on. There's also a thing to overlap, so you can have them blend between each other. So if I turn that on, you can blend them with dissolving and stuff. So that's just fading in and out. But let's just say sequence layers for 1 frame each. So it'll create a new comp. And then all these layers will now be lined up one after each other for 1 frame. So it will still look exactly the same as the other thing, but now instead of having to manually go line up all these things, you've got all your layers lined up like this. So it used to be a lot harder to do this. You would have to manually drag them all in, and then you would have to select a thing and do keyframe assistant sequence layers. I mean, it's a few more button presses, but it does the same thing. It will sequence them one after each other. But in this case, you can just import them. It creates a comp and layers them up. So hopefully that makes sense. You'll see now that my my project panel is now looking horribly complicated because I've got 80 images all sitting there and then all the other things. So this is where you would start wanting to organize your project, because we don't want to have all these things having to scroll through here. So I'm going to show you one simple thing you can do. So I've got all these images over here. I'm going to select the one, scale down, press Shift. So I've got all these images. And if I click and drag, there is a little folder icon there. So I'm clicking and dragging them onto a folder. And this will be sequence. So now I've got a little folder with sequence, which has all these images in. And then you can just shrink that down. And then you don't have to worry about it. It's just easier to organize. So you can actually create a new folder. You can have comps. You can have a new folder for art, music, whatever. And then you can drag your different things. Sound effects. So I can go drag cartoon bounce, sound effect there. Drag images into art. Select my comps. Drag them into comps. Stuff like that. And you just really makes it easier to find things. So you're looking for art, you can open up art, find your images, find your sound effects, things like that. And you can also search in here. So if you're looking for dog, you can find things named dog, or you can find what format was that thing in? MP3. So you can say MP3, find your MP3 file, or you can say PNG to find PNGs or whatever. So this project panel is pretty powerful for doing stuff. In that folder, I had Illustrator files and Photoshop files. I'm going to show you now how to create your files properly to work with them in After Effects. Because let's say you're creating a character and you want to animate like their arms and legs to be separate objects. You have to lay out your files in a specific way for that to work. So the easiest is Photoshop. If I open up my, what you'll get in this is just a simple penguin I created for you. And in there, we've got a layer for eye, a layer for wing. So if I turn that off, you see the eye disappears. Turn off wing, you see the one wing disappears, body, the back wing, and each of the feet. So The Photoshop version of this is the simplest to understand. You've just got a layer for each different thing. Or you can actually use groups. So if I have, let's say I have foot 1 and foot 2, and I put them into a folder for feet, you can import this into After Effects and it will recognize the structure. So let me just actually save this because I didn't have one of these with folders. Let's just do folder. And so each one of these is named just so it makes sense when you're working that you can see what each layer is. And yeah, each one of these things should come up in After Effects. So if I go in here, I'm going to select this one that I just created, Penguin one with folder. Yours will be a bit different right now. So if I do this plain as I'm doing it now, I'm going to say input options, create composition with this layer selected, import. Then we get this little pop-up over here. So this is actually an important thing to check your settings on. So you see it's saying here, composition, retain layer sizes. So I'll explain this to you now, but there's other options here. There's footage and composition retain layer sizes. When you're creating a character or something that you want to animate in After Effects, this is normally what you want to have selected. Because what this will do is when I say OK now, it will create a comp the same size as your Photoshop file. And in here, you see we've got a comp again. So if I click in here, double click on this, this opens up that comp. So there's a comp within a comp. You know, these things get complicated in After Effects. But in here, you'll see we've got eye, wing, body, other wing, and then what I created, which was a folder, becomes a comp. So the feet folder from Photoshop with foot 1 and foot 2 in After Effects becomes a comp with foot 1 and foot 2 as individual layers. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So I've just switched back to this. Now when I zoom in over here and let's say select the eye, you'll see that I'm just zooming in with the mouse wheel. It's got this little bounding box around the eye with a little center around the center of this. So this just gives you the individual eye around here, which makes sense, right? Each layer is just cropped around what that layer contains. If I had imported it with this option, import again, but with just plain composition, you will then get this thing of every single layer over here is just the same full size as the composition. So it can be a little bit harder to work with, especially for small objects. So like if I select the eye now, you see this box is the entire size of the comp. So it just makes it a little bit harder to work with your layers. And if you did it the other way, accidentally or on purpose, where you just said footage, what this will do is you'll see it's merged layers. Basically, it flattens the entire thing and you don't get any layers. This is now one flat thing. You can't move individual bits. So if you want to animate your character and you import as footage, you're going to have trouble. You can't do that. So you would have to import it as the composition, or better yet, retain layer-sized compositions, because then you get cropped to your specific layers. Importing as footage, though, is useful if you just want to import a specific layer. So say import footage, and you just want to choose, I want to import just the body. So then I can just have a layer with just the body. So that's why you would have that option, is just to get a specific thing. Okay. So to lay out your files, you just have individual layers for all your different things. And in this case, you would want to have a layer for absolutely any specific thing that you want to move. This is a very simple character. We've just got a wing that we want to flap or something, an eye, and the feet. So it's really simple. But say you were doing a more complicated character like a human or something, you would have like a layer for the eye, a layer for the nose, a layer for the mouth, maybe even a layer, like multiple layers for the mouth, like arms, legs, hands, fingers, t-shirt, pants, clothing of all sorts. But yeah, if you want to have like a shadow, you kind of want to have that as an individual object, because imagine you want to like make your character jump up. You want the character, the shadow to stay at one point. You don't want to have the shadow moving around with the character or something. You want the shadow to just be on the ground or something. So you would want that to be an individual layer. But I'll go into more detail just now on that. Okay, so the Photoshop importing is fairly straightforward. You just want to have individual layers. So now I'm going to import Illustrator files. And one, we get just the simple Illustrator image. We've got, it's exactly the same thing. We've got the wing, we've got the eyes and stuff. All individual objects or whatever. But if I go into After Effects and I import the penguin, the non-layered one here, say import, even if I say composition with layer size, the dialog is just a little bit different for some reason. You don't get the option for composition, retain layer size. You just get composition and then check layer size. So just check that. If I import this now and I go into that comp, it's still one layer. So that's because the way Illustrator works, it's not individual objects that it imports, it's layers that you import. So just be aware of that. So this file, even though they're individual objects, they're not individual layers. So you have to create them in individual layers. So you see, if I open up the layered file over here, what I have done is I have created, in here, I've created new layers. So I've created a bunch of different layers and I've renamed them to whatever. And then I've dragged individual objects, so like the wing, into individual layers. So you can have multiple objects on one layer, but they will, when you bring them into After Effects, they will just be one layer that you can animate. So every single individual thing that you want to animate, you have to create a new layer and drag those things into that. And then, of course, name your layers, because then when you bring them into After Effects, you can see what they are. So I'm just going to do this import thing one last time with the penguin layered file. And then I'm just going to say, just to make things quicker, I'm going to say import as composition, retain layer sizes over here. And there you go. If I double click on that, now I have eye, wing, body, all as separate layers that can now be animated. And because these are Illustrator vector images, I can, if I select these, scale them up, I can get them with infinite detail. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that by default. You'll see that they look pixelated now. So to fix that, you just need to go with your layers selected, toggle switches and modes at the bottom here, so you can see these icons over here. So toggle switches modes, and then you'll see that there is a little star icon over here. So basically it says for vector layers, continuously rasterize. So what that will do is it will basically sharpen up vector images into your video. So now I can scale these up an enormous amount and they'll always look sharp. So you just have to check those little star icons on your layers for your vector images. If you have all your layers selected, it'll apply to all of them. If you have just one layer selected, it'll turn it on or off on that individual layer. So even if you create your things in Illustrator, by default they won't be perfectly crisp. You have to turn this on. But you can now scale them as much as you want and they'll always look good. Whew, okay. Does that make sense? Okay, so if that does, I'm going to continue and show you one last thing today, and then we shall end it for today because we have covered quite a lot. Let's say we have got our penguin over here, but it's all different layers. So if I grab the body, the bits stay behind. So that can be annoying, like you want them to move as one character, right? So the body feels like it would be the main thing. So what we can do is a thing called parenting. So we have the body. What we want to do is we want to have everything basically be attached to the body. So if I select all the layers in the layer list, let me just make it bigger so you can see them all. Select all my layers. And what you can do is you'll see that there is a little parent and link panel over here. If you don't see that, you should actually be able to see that all the time. At the moment, it will say none, but with them all selected, you can click that drop down and you can say body. So that will now say all these layers are now parented to the body. So that means they are child objects of the body. And because the body is itself, that stays as none. So what happens now, if I pick up the body, all of them move with it. So I've only got the body selected and they will all move with it. And then I can individually manipulate these things. So the wing, I'm rotating it. It rotates around the anchor point, but we'll get into that a little bit now. If I move the body now, the wing still stays with its individual transformation, but relative to the body. So this makes animating characters and things way easier. You don't have to animate them all separately. you just animate them doing their relative motions, and you just move one main thing. So the last thing is we've got this wing, but we want it to like flap and stuff around the shoulder point. So this is where you want to adjust the anchor point. So the best tool for that in this case is to use the pan behind tool, the anchor point tool. Select your anchor point and move that to where you want it to rotate. The benefit of this is you can move it without moving the layer itself. And now when I rotate it, this will now rotate around that point. So I can add keyframes to this. Just let's do a little simple arm flapping or something over here. And now if I select the body and do some position animation, the wing will flap, but it will stay attached to the body and will rotate around that anchor point. Do you want me to repeat the parenting procedure? I think you do. So your thing will start off with none. So none of the things are parented. So we get this horrible thing happening where everything is just separate layers. So we want all these layers to move with the body. So I'm just going to select them all. And under the parent link dropdown, I'm going to select body. So now all of these will move with the body. Just watch out when you do this. If I just undo that now where there's no parenting, if I parent them while they're in funny positions like this, let's say, so if I do the parenting now, it's going to parent them from that position. So make sure when you parent them that they're in the correct position that you want. Otherwise, you're going to have troubles getting that right again. There is another way that you can do this parenting. So let me just select all these layers. So let's say you've got a really long list and you've got like 500 layers over here, and you don't want to go scrolling through this list. You can't find the one you're looking for. There is this little squiggly spiral icon over here. It's called the pick whip, or the parent pick whip over here. So what you can do is click and drag with that. If I've got all these layers selected, it will do it with all of these. And then you'll see it gives you this little blue line. So you can say parent to body. So I'm just dragging it so where it's showing the body layer. And that's basically selecting that layer and it's turning it to the parent. So it does the exact same thing, except you're just doing it visually, except not from a list. Does the basics of parenting make sense so far? So that's just joining together bits so you can ease your animation. That's basically what we're going to cover today. I know we went through a whole lot of things. Otherwise, yeah, that's today's training, and we'll be back tomorrow. Cool.